I've been told that revenge is a dish best served cold. In my line of work, it's a dish best served at exactly 187 degrees Fahrenheit for precisely 12 minutes, with a pinch of smoked paprika added in the last 30 seconds. They didn't know that, of course. They just knew the recipe. And a recipe, as they were about to learn, is just a list of ingredients. It's not the magic. My name is Leo, and for 32 years I was the plant manager for a food processing giant and the keeper of that magic. If you like stories about how the corporate world sometimes gets exactly what it deserves, then stick around, because you're going to love this one. And hey, while you're here, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot, and you won't want to miss what comes next. It all started, as these things so often do, with an MBA. Her name was Jessica. She strode into our company like a conquering hero returning from a war no one else knew we were fighting. She was the new vice president of operations, fresh from some tech startup that had burned brightly and then vanished, leaving nothing behind but a trail of venture capital smoke and a few meaningless buzzwords. Jessica was all sharp angles and sharper pantsuits, and she spoke in a language composed entirely of corporate jargon. Everything was about synergy, optimization, and digital transformation. To her, a factory that had been the cornerstone of a billion-dollar brand for half a century wasn't a living, breathing entity. It was a legacy asset, a collection of depreciating machinery and inefficient overhead. And I, apparently, was the most inefficient piece of overhead of all. The meeting was as sterile as the stainless steel in our processing vats. It took place in a glass-walled conference room on the executive floor, a part of the building I rarely visited. I always felt the air up there was too thin, too clean. It didn't smell like anything. Down on my floor, the air was rich with the scent of simmering tomatoes, roasting garlic, and a dozen other spices that told me everything was running smoothly. The smell was my dashboard. I could tell you the pH of batch 3B just by walking past kettle number 7. Jessica, I suspect, couldn't tell the difference between cumin and cinnamon. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She slid a thin folder across the polished table. It landed with a soft final thud. My name was on the tab. Leo Maxwell. Inside, I knew, was the official end of a career that had started when I was 22, fresh out of trade school and eager to get my hands dirty. I had started on the canning line, working my way up through maintenance, quality control, shift supervisor, and finally, plant manager. I hadn't just worked for this company, I had helped build it. The founder, Arthur Pennington, a man who believed in quality over quantity, had been my mentor. But Arthur was long gone, and his portrait in the lobby was the only thing left of his philosophy. Jessica cleared her throat, a dry, impatient sound. Her eyes, the color of a faded balance sheet, held no warmth. She said, "We're making some structural changes to drive efficiency and embrace a more forward-thinking operational model. While we appreciate your years of service, Leo, but we feel it's time to inject some new blood into the leadership team. Your position is being made redundant." Redundant, that was the word she used. After 32 years of 15-hour days, of holidays spent calibrating steam valves, of knowing the name of every single employee and their children, I was redundant. It was the kind of bloodless corporate language designed to strip the humanity from the act of destroying a man's life's work. And the new blood, the forward-thinking operational model she was so proud of, that would be her nephew, Kyle. He was sitting next to her, looking profoundly bored. He was maybe 25, with a faint wispy beard that looked like it had given up halfway through growing. He had a degree in disruptive innovation from some online university, and his primary qualification for running a multi-million-dollar food processing plant seemed to be his last name, and a supreme confidence that bordered on the divine. "As part of your exit agreement," Jessica continued, her voice flat and devoid of emotion, "you will hand over all documented operational procedures, including the complete recipe and methodology for our flagship product, the heritage sauce. Kyle will be taking over your duties, and he'll need to get up to speed quickly." I just nodded. I didn't give them the satisfaction of an argument. I didn't plead. In their world of spreadsheets and profit margins, loyalty and experience were liabilities, not assets. They had already made their calculation. Arguing with them would be like arguing with a calculator, so I slid the folder back across the table. I said, I understand. The one thing they didn't count on, the one variable their spreadsheets could never account for, was the difference between a recipe and a craft. The recipe for our best-selling heritage sauce was on paper, deceptively simple. Tomatoes, vinegar, sugar, a blend of 14 spices. It was all there, locked in a safe in my office, the ingredient list, and basic instructions typed out on an old IBM Selectric typewriter by Arthur Pennington himself back in 1978. I dutifully unlocked the safe, handed the laminated pages to the smug-looking nephew, and watched him scan it with an air of dismissive understanding. He probably thought he could automate the whole thing with an app by lunchtime. What wasn't on that paper was the soul of the sauce. It was the knowledge that you had to use San Marzano tomatoes, but only those grown in the volcanic soil on the south side of Mount Vesuvius, and only from the second harvest in late August when their sugar content was at its peak. It was knowing that you had to sweat the onions in unsalted butter for exactly 18 minutes, not until they were translucent, but until they were what I called glassy, a state that had a particular shimmer under the factory lights. It was knowing that the cayenne pepper had to be added after the primary reduction, not before, because adding it too early would scorch the capsaicin and leave a bitter, acrid aftertaste instead of a warm, blooming heat. It was the timing, the temperatures, the textures, the sounds, the smells. It was a symphony of 1,000 tiny details, a process that lived not on a piece of paper, but in my head, and in the muscle memory of my hands. It was a secret I had guarded for decades, a legacy passed down to me from Arthur himself, and I had never ever written it down. As I did my final walk through the plant, the place that had been my second home for more than 3 decades, a strange sense of calm washed over me. The hum of the conveyor belts, the hiss of the steam kettles, the rhythmic clank of the bottling machine, it was all a part of me. Kyle followed a few paces behind, scrolling on his phone, already looking for ways to optimize a process he couldn't begin to comprehend. He pointed at the row of massive copper-lined kettles. Those look ancient. We should replace them with a modern, fully automated system, cheaper, more efficient. I stopped and looked at him. I said, kettle number 3 runs 5 degrees hotter on the west side. You have to stir it counterclockwise for the first 10 minutes to compensate. Kettle number 5 has a weak seal on the main valve. You have to bleed the pressure twice during the initial simmer. That's not in a manual. That's just knowing the machine. He just shrugged, a little smirk playing on his lips. Or we could just get new machines that actually work properly. That's what optimization is all about, old-timer. Old-timer. He called me old-timer. I just smiled, a thin, tight smile that didn't reach my eyes. I handed him the keys to my office. I said, good luck with that. You're going to need it. The drive home was a blur. The familiar roads, the houses I'd seen every day for 32 years, they all seemed foreign, like I was seeing them through someone else's eyes. I pulled into my driveway and just sat in the car for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled. My hands were resting on the steering wheel, the same hands that could tell by touch if a batch of sauce had the right viscosity. Now they just felt empty. 32 years. I was 4 days away from my pension vesting. 4 days. The cruelty of the timing was so precise, so calculated, it felt almost personal. It wasn't just about saving money, it was a power move. It was Jessica showing everyone that the old ways, the old loyalties, meant nothing. Competence isn't cheap, until you lose it. And they had just lost it, in a way they couldn't possibly fathom yet. When I finally walked inside, my wife Sarah took one look at my face and knew. She didn't say anything, she just wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time that day, the cold, sterile feeling from that conference room began to thaw. I stood there, in the warmth of our small kitchen, and let the full weight of the betrayal settle in. It wasn't just a job, it was my identity. It was my life's work. I had poured everything I had into that company, into that sauce. I had sacrificed weekends, holidays, family dinners. For what?
to be called redundant and replaced by a kid who thought a complex culinary process was something you could troubleshoot like a faulty Wi-Fi router. That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself in my workshop, a small cluttered space in the back of the garage. On a workbench, under a clean cloth, was my real passion project. For years, I had been experimenting on my own, tinkering with a new sauce recipe. It was an artisan blend, using heirloom tomatoes from my own garden, black crimson Cherokee purples, smoked peppers, and a secret ingredient I'd stumbled upon during a trip to Italy, a splash of high-quality balsamic vinegar, aged for 25.
I called it Leo's Reserve. It was a world away from the mass-produced heritage sauce. It was richer, more complex, with a smoky depth that the company's product could never achieve. I had always dreamed of maybe starting a small business with it after I retired. It was a someday project. Suddenly, someday was now. The memories started flooding back, unbidden. I remembered my first day, a nervous 22-year-old standing in front of Arthur Pennington. He was a barrel-chested man, with hands like catcher's mitts, and a booming laugh that could be heard over the roar of the machinery. He wasn't an MBA. He was a chef who had stumbled into a successful business. He hired me not because of a resume, but because he saw I had a feel for the work. He'd grab a ladle, dip it into a kettle, and have me taste it. "What does it need, Leo?" he'd ask. "More salt, more time," and I'd taste it, closing my eyes, letting the flavors tell their story. "A little more acidity, Mr. Pennington, maybe a touch of brown sugar to balance it." He'd nod, a slow, appraising look in his eyes. "The boy's got the palate," he'd say to his foreman. Over the years we perfected the heritage sauce together. It was our baby. We didn't have focus groups or marketing teams. We had our own taste buds, and an unwavering commitment to making something we were proud of. The recipe itself was simple, but the process was our secret handshake. We tweaked the machinery ourselves, Marcus, our head of maintenance, and I. We'd spend hours after the plant closed, tinkering with the steam pressure, adjusting the gear ratios on the mixers, even relining one of the kettles with a specific type of copper we had to special order from Germany because it distributed heat more evenly. None of this was ever documented in any official company manual. It was a combination of tribal knowledge and sheer intuition. It was craftsmanship. I remembered the day Arthur called me into his office, about a year before he passed away. He was looking frail, the booming voice a little quieter. He pointed to the framed recipe on his wall. "They're bringing in these new business school types, Leo," he'd said, his voice laced with a weary resignation. "They talk about margins and scalability. They see this place as a set of numbers on a page. They don't understand the heart of it." He made me promise him something. Never let them turn our sauce into just another commodity. Never let the accountants get their hands on the process. Keep it safe. Keep it with you. Was I foolish for honoring that promise? Maybe. A more cynical man would have documented every last detail and used it as leverage for a bigger salary, a better position. But it wasn't about leverage for me. It was about honor. It was a promise to a man who had given me a chance, who had taught me everything I knew. I had kept the process a secret, not to hold the company hostage, but to protect the legacy of its founder from the very people who now ran it. My loyalty was to the sauce, to the craft, not to the corporate entity that had forgotten its own history. The irony was thicker than a batch of over-reduced tomato paste. The next few days were a strange limbo. I worked in my garden, pruning my tomato plants, my hands caked in rich, dark soil. It felt good to be creating something again, something that was mine. Sarah encouraged me to focus on my artisan sauce. She brought me out a glass of iced tea and said, "Maybe this is a blessing, Leo. Maybe it's time to build something for us, not for them." And for the first time, a flicker of something other than anger ignited inside me. It felt like hope. My severance package was standard, 6 months' pay, but it came with an ironclad non-compete clause. I couldn't work for or consult with any major food processing company in North America for 2 years. Jessica probably thought that had me cornered. A man my age with my specific skill set, locked out of the industry. What could I possibly do? She had underestimated me at every turn, and this was her final, arrogant miscalculation. The non-compete was designed to stop me from taking my knowledge to a competitor. It never occurred to her that I could become a competitor myself. A small one, sure, but a competitor nonetheless. I had a lawyer friend, Tom, look it over. He confirmed my suspicion. The agreement was about competing with their existing product lines. It said nothing about launching a new premium artisan product that wasn't in the same market category. It was a loophole, a small one, but big enough to drive a truck through. The catalyst came on Wednesday afternoon. My phone rang. It was Marcus, the head of maintenance. He sounded stressed. "Leo," he said, his voice low, "you are not going to believe what is happening here. It's a catastrophe." I sat down at my kitchen table. "Tell me everything, Marcus." "It's the nephew, Kyle. He's a menace. The first batch of heritage sauce they tried to make on their own. Leo, it's garbage. They followed the recipe to the letter," he said. He had a damn checklist. But he didn't know about bleeding the pressure on kettle 5. It over-caramelized the sugars in the first stage. The whole batch tastes like burnt ketchup. I could picture it perfectly. The acrid smell, the dark brownish color, instead of that vibrant rich red. The sticky, tar-like consistency. "It gets worse," Marcus continued. He tried to fix it. He accused the equipment of being faulty, said the thermostats were off. So he bypassed the main regulator on kettle 7 and cranked the heat manually. He scorched the whole damn thing. We had to dump 5,000 gallons. The smell, my God, the whole plant smells like a tire fire. I took a slow sip of my coffee. And Jessica, she's losing her mind. She's screaming at everyone, blaming the ingredients, the machines, the workers, everyone but her precious nephew. And Leo, the big global foods order is due on Friday, $1 million worth of product. They have nothing, not a single case that's fit to ship. Global Foods was our biggest, most important client. Their contract was the bedrock of our plant's profitability. Losing them would be a disaster. "What's Kyle's plan now?" I asked, a cold, calm feeling spreading through my chest. This was it, the beginning of the end. "That's the best part," Marcus said, a note of dark humor in his voice. "He's on the internet. He's literally Googling how to make tomato sauce in bulk. He thinks he can fix a complex thermal and chemical process that took us years to perfect by watching a YouTube video." I had to stifle a laugh. The arrogance was breathtaking. He had the sheet music, but had no idea how to play the instrument. He was trying to conduct a symphony with a broken stick. They owned the recipe, but I owned the craft, and without the craft, the recipe was just an expensive grocery list. "Thank you for the update, Marcus. Keep me posted." I hung up the phone and looked out at my garden. The sun was shining on the rows of tomato plants, their fruits heavy on the vine. A plan began to form in my mind. Not a plan for revenge, not really. Revenge was too small, too emotional. This was a plan for justice. It was a plan to prove that experience, loyalty, and craftsmanship still had value in a world that had forgotten how to measure them. It was time to start bottling Leo's reserve. The next 24 hours were a blur of focused activity. I converted my garage workshop into a small-scale production facility. I called a supplier I knew and trusted, a small, family-owned farm, and ordered 100 pounds of their best San Marzano tomatoes. I bought new jars, designed a simple, elegant label on my computer, and got to work. Sarah worked alongside me, washing and sterilizing the jars, her presence a quiet, steady source of support. We worked late into the night, the garage filled with the rich, smoky aroma of my own creation. It felt right. It felt like I was reclaiming something that had been taken from me. Not the job, but my purpose. My foresight, if you can call it that, wasn't born from a desire to sabotage the company. It was born from a deep, abiding love for the craft itself. For years, I had kept meticulous personal notes, not about the secret process of the heritage sauce that promised to Arthur was sacred, but about everything else. I had logs of equipment performance, detailed records of supplier quality, notes on flavor profiles of different tomato varietals from different seasons. I had notebooks filled with ideas for new products, process improvements, efficiency gains that I had proposed over the years, only to be shot down by budget committees who couldn't see past the next quarter's earnings report. These notebooks were my personal intellectual property, developed on my own time. They were my arsenal. One of those notebooks was dedicated entirely to Leo's Reserve. It contained years of trial and error, detailed notes on smoking different types of peppers, on the precise aging of the balsamic vinegar, on the exact moment to add fresh basil to capture its essential oils without turning it bitter. This wasn't a half-baked idea. It was a fully realized market-ready product that had been waiting for its moment. My network of allies was small, but fiercely loyal. It wasn't something I had consciously built. It was the natural result of treating people with respect for 3 decades. My primary ally was, of course, Marcus. He was more than just the maintenance chief. He was a master craftsman in his own right. He knew every bolt, every weld, every quirky groan and shudder of that factory's machinery, because like me, he had helped build and modify much of it himself. He and I shared an unspoken bond, the kind that forms between men who solve problems with their hands, not with spreadsheets. When Jessica had announced my redundancy, Marcus had been the first person to shake my hand on my way out, his grip firm, his eyes telling me everything his mouth couldn't say in front of the new management. My other key ally was someone they didn't even know existed in my sphere of influence, David Chen, the head of procurement for Global Foods. Over the years, David and I had developed a relationship that went beyond a simple client-vendor dynamic. We had bonded over a shared frustration with corporate bureaucracy and a mutual respect for quality. We'd have lunch a few times a year, not as representatives of our companies, but as 2 guys who actually cared about the product. He often complained that his own bosses were pushing for cheaper ingredients, lower prices, sacrificing the very quality their brand was built on. He trusted my palate and my judgment implicitly. If I told him a batch was good, he knew it was good. He didn't need to see a lab report. That relationship, built on years of trust and consistent quality, was an asset the company had no way to quantify, and as such, they had no idea it was about to walk out the door with me. The plan wasn't to destroy my old company. That would be too easy, too crude. The plan was to build something better, and in doing so expose the hollowness of their new model. The plan was to let their arrogance be their own undoing. Thursday morning, the phone rang again. It was Marcus. "It's over, Leo. They're done." "What happened?" I asked, wiping my hands on a rag. I had just finished sealing the first case of Leo's Reserve. 12 beautiful jars of deep crimson sauce, their labels perfectly aligned. They tried one more batch this morning. Kyle, in his infinite wisdom, decided to double the amount of vinegar to cut through the burnt taste of his last disaster. He turned the whole thing into a vat of acidic sludge. It's completely unsalvageable. Jessica came down to the floor, took one look at it, and I've never seen a human being turn that color before. She looked like she was going to be physically ill. Then she started screaming at Kyle, right in front of the entire shift. Called him incompetent, a failure. He just stood there, white as a sheet. The $1 million order for Global Foods is officially dead in the water. They're going to have to call David Chen and tell him they're defaulting. A quiet satisfaction settled over me. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was the feeling of a natural law reasserting itself, the feeling of gravity finally taking hold of something that had been artificially propped up for too long. Then Marcus said something that made my blood run cold for a second. "Leo, she knows, or she suspects." I heard her screaming at Kyle, something like, "That old man must have done something. He must have sabotaged the recipe. They're looking for a scapegoat. Be careful." "Thanks, Marcus. And you be careful too." I hung up the phone. The first move had been made, but it hadn't been mine. They had made it themselves. They had loaded the gun, pointed it at their own foot, and pulled the trigger. My role was simply not to interfere with the inevitable outcome. The antagonist's panic when it came was even more spectacular than Marcus had described. It began with an email from Jessica, time-stamped at 2:15 p.m. The subject line was "You Argent, recipe discrepancy." The tone was accusatory.
filled with passive-aggressive corporate speak. It has come to our attention that the documented process for the heritage sauce you provided may be incomplete, leading to significant production challenges. We require you to provide a more detailed step-by-step operational guide immediately to rectify this situation, as per the terms of your departure agreement. I read the email twice, then took a long, slow sip of my coffee.
I knew my exit agreement inside and out. I had agreed to hand over all documented procedures. I had done exactly that. The undocumented knowledge, the craft, the soul of the sauce, that was never the company's property. It was mine. I typed out a short, simple reply. Dear Jessica, I have reviewed my exit agreement. I fulfilled my obligation by providing the complete and official documented recipe, as it has existed for the past 30 years. I am not obligated to provide any additional consulting or training. I wish you the best of luck in resolving your production challenges. Sincerely, Leo Maxwell. I hit send. The silence that followed was more satisfying than any shouting match could ever be. I imagined her reading that email, the color draining from her face, as she realized I wasn't going to be her easy way out. About an hour later, the real panic began. My phone started ringing. It was a number I didn't recognize, but it had the company's area code. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again and again. On the fourth try, I answered, putting it on speaker. Leo, it was Jessica. Her voice was strained, a high-pitched, frantic sound that was a world away from the cool, condescending tone she had used in the conference room. This is Leo, I said calmly. Where are you? We need you to come in, right now. There's a problem with the kettles. I'm sorry, Jessica. I'm no longer an employee of the company. I can't come in. Don't play games with me, Leo. You did this. You deliberately withheld information. You sabotaged us. Our legal team will be in touch. We'll sue you for everything you have. I let the threat hang in the air for a moment. Then I said, Jessica, are you admitting that your new plant manager, with his degree in disruptive innovation, is incapable of following a simple recipe? Are you saying that you, the VP of Operations, have allowed a situation to develop where you are about to default on your largest contract? That sounds like a failure of management, not a problem with a former employee. I have my copy of the exit agreement right here. It also contains a non-disparagement clause. I'd be careful about making baseless accusations. It could get very expensive for you personally. There was a long, choked silence on the other end of the line. I had her. The threat of a lawsuit was hollow, and she knew it. A lawsuit would mean discovery. It would mean depositions. It would mean the entire story of her and her nephew's incompetence would become a matter of public record. It would be corporate suicide. When she spoke again, her voice was completely different. The anger was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading tone. Leo, please, just tell us what to do. The global foods order. We're going to lose them. It's $1 million. Just this one time. Help us out. Name your price. Name my price. The four most beautiful words in the English language when spoken by a desperate adversary. I hung up the phone. I walked out to my garage and looked at the cases of Leo's reserves stacking up. The public reveal of my victory wasn't going to be a press release or a news article. It was going to be a quiet, simple act. I picked up my phone and dialed David Chen at Global Foods. David, it's Leo Maxwell. Leo, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry, man. That company has lost its mind. To be honest, we've been concerned about their quality control ever since the new VP came on board. That's actually why I'm calling, David. I know you're in a tough spot with your order. I heard they might have some production challenges. You could say that, he said with a dry laugh. They called me an hour ago. Said there was a catastrophic equipment failure and they're defaulting on the shipment. $1 million hole in my inventory, right before the quarterly report. My boss is threatening to have my head. David, I might have a solution. It's not the heritage sauce. It's something new, something better. I've started my own small batch, artisan line. I call it Leo's Reserve. I have a few hundred cases ready to go right now. I could have them delivered to your warehouse by tomorrow morning. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him thinking. Leo's Reserve, huh? Made by you? Made by me, I confirmed. My own recipe, my own hands. He didn't even hesitate. Send me a sample. Overnight it. If it's half as good as I think it's going to be, I'll take every last jar you have. And we can talk about a much, much bigger contract going forward. Forget your old company. Their name is mud around here now. You, Leo, are a name I trust. And just like that, the silent takeover was complete. I hadn't stolen their client. I had simply been the one person who could solve his problem. They hadn't lost the contract because of me. They had lost it because of their own incompetence. I was just there to pick up the pieces. Competence, as it turns out, is the ultimate leverage. The power shift was swift and brutal, like a dam breaking. It started with Marcus. He called me on Thursday evening, not long after my call with David Chen. "Leo, I quit," he said. His voice was steady, relieved. I just walked into Jessica's office, put my keys on her desk and told her I was done. I can't work for these clowns. The two best senior line supervisors, Maria and Carlos, they walked out with me. "We're a team. Where are you going to go, Marcus?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I was hoping you might have some equipment that needs maintaining," he said, a smile in his voice. "I hear you're starting something new." I told him to come over in the morning. I'd have a contract and a paycheck waiting for him, for double his old salary. Maria and Carlos too. You don't build a business with spreadsheets and buzzwords. You build it with good people. And I was taking the best people with me. This wasn't poaching. This was a talent exodus. It was a vote of no confidence in the new regime, and a vote of absolute faith in the old one. People don't quit companies, they quit bad managers. And Jessica and Kyle were the worst kind of managers. Arrogant, ignorant, and utterly dismissive of the very people whose skill their success depended on. The next morning, Friday, the day the global foods order was due, was a beautiful crisp autumn day. I was in my garage, which now looked more like a bustling startup than a hobby workshop. Marcus was there, already tuning up the small batch mixer I'd bought, a thoughtful, focused look on his face. Maria and Carlos were organizing the inventory, their movements efficient and practiced. It felt like a family reunion. We were a team again, building something new, something that was ours. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Jessica. Her voice was a ghost of its former self. All the arrogance, the anger, the panic, it was all gone, burned away, leaving behind the hollowed-out shell of a desperate executive. "Leo," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They told me. Marcus, Maria, Carlos, they all resigned. They're working for you, aren't they?" "They're working with me." "Yes," I corrected her gently. Her next words were the ones I had been waiting for. The desperate counter-manipulation. The last, futile move of a chess player who knows they've been checkmated. "Come back, Leo, please. We were wrong. I was wrong. We'll give you your job back. We'll give you a promotion. Director of Operations, a 20% raise, a new pension plan, fully vested on day one. Just come back and fix this. Kyle is gone. I fired him this morning. It's over. Just name your price." I listened patiently, letting her lay all her cards on the table. The offer was tempting, I'll admit. It was a total capitulation, a complete vindication, but it was fool's gold. Going back would mean working for a person I didn't respect, in a culture I now despised. It would mean putting the collar back on after tasting freedom. "Jessica," I said, my voice calm and firm, "I appreciate the offer. I truly do. But my price is something you can no longer afford to pay. It was loyalty, and you cashed that out for a savings of 4 days on my pension." There was a sharp intake of breath on her end. She hadn't thought I'd make the connection, or maybe she just hadn't cared. "I have my own company now, Jessica. I have my own team. We have our first major client. In fact, their truck is on its way to my house right now to pick up their first shipment." She was silent. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head, the pieces clicking into place. "Wait, what client?" she asked, a new dread creeping into her voice. I let a moment of silence hang in the air before delivering the final blow. Global Foods. David Chen and I had a very productive conversation yesterday. He was very impressed with my new product, Leo's Reserve. He thinks it has great market potential. He was so disappointed that you had to default on their heritage sauce order. It really left them in a lurch. I could hear a faint, strangled sound, like a sob being choked back. She understood now. She hadn't just lost an order. She hadn't just lost a few employees. She had lost her biggest client, to the very man she had dismissed as redundant, as an old-timer. She had been outmaneuvered, outplayed and completely undone, not by corporate raiding or industrial espionage, but by simple competence and the enduring power of a good reputation. I have to go now, Jessica. We have a lot of work to do. Good luck with everything. I ended the call. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel a surge of vengeful glee. I just felt a sense of balance. The world had been out of alignment, and now it was right again. The new workplace reality had been established, a reality where value wasn't determined by a line on a budget, but by the skill, dedication, and integrity of the people doing the work. The power hadn't just shifted, it had come home. The final confrontation wasn't a shouting match or a dramatic boardroom showdown. It was something much quieter and far more definitive. About a week later, I received a certified letter from the company's lawyers. It wasn't a lawsuit, it was an offer. They wanted to buy my new company, Artisan Provisions. They offered me a staggering amount of money, enough to retire comfortably 10 times over. They also offered me a position as a permanent, high-level consultant, a brand ambassador for the heritage sauce, which they were now desperate to resurrect. It was a complete and total surrender. I scheduled a meeting, not with Jessica, but with the CEO, a man who had been conspicuously silent throughout this whole ordeal. I walked into the same glass-walled conference room where I had been fired. This time, I wasn't the one being dismissed. I was the one holding all the cards. The CEO, a man named Henderson, was all smiles and apologies. He talked about misunderstandings and unfortunate personnel decisions. He slid the acquisition offer across the table to me. It was thick, bound in a leather folder. I didn't even open it. I slid it right back across the table. Mr. Henderson, I'm not interested in selling, I said calmly. He looked stunned. But the offer, it's more than fair. It's generous. It's not about the money, I said. I told him about my promise to Arthur Pennington. I told him about the 32 years I had poured into his company. I told him that what they had done wasn't just a business decision. It was a betrayal of the company's own founding principles. And then I delivered the final quiet blow. I looked him straight in the eye and said,
You don't need to buy my company, but you do need a supplier for a high-quality premium tomato sauce. Now that Global Foods has terminated their contract for the heritage line, my company, Artisan Provisions, would be willing to entertain a proposal. We can supply you with Leo's Reserve at a significant markup, of course. You can rebrand it as your new Heritage Gold or whatever your marketing department comes up with. Your customers get a better product, and your company gets to stay afloat. Henderson just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. I had just offered to sell him back his own salvation, on my terms. He would become my client. The new workplace reality was that I was no longer the servant. I was the master. He would be writing checks to the man his VP had called redundant. He slowly nodded. Send me a proposal, Leo. The news that Jessica had been fired came a few days later, not from a company memo, but from Marcus, who still had friends on the inside. She was unceremoniously dismissed, a scapegoat for the Global Foods fiasco. The company had to publicly report the loss of the contract, and their stock took a nosedive. Henderson had to save face, and Jessica was the price. As for her nephew Kyle, he was reassigned to the mailroom, a fitting end for someone with a degree in disruptive innovation. A few months later, I was standing not in a corporate office, but in my own. It was a small, modest space attached to the new production facility we were leasing. On the wall was a framed photo of me, Marcus, Maria, and Carlos, standing next to our first major shipment to Global Foods. Next to it was a framed photo of Arthur Pennington,
I felt like I had finally fulfilled my promise to him. We were thriving. We had landed 2 more major clients, and our biggest problem was keeping up with demand. I was at the head of a table, surrounded by my loyal team, grateful clients, and the rich, comforting smell of simmering tomatoes. It was a state of perfect balance, of professional fulfillment. I wasn't just a plant manager anymore. I was a founder. I had built something from scratch, something based on the old-fashioned principles of quality, loyalty, and respect. The final piece of the story is my favorite. My old company did in fact become my biggest customer. They buy Leo's Reserve from me at a premium price, repackage it, and sell it to their remaining clients. I am in essence the secret ingredient they can no longer live without. They didn't just lose an employee. They gained a master they have to pay. Every time I sign one of their checks, I think about that sterile conference room and Jessica's condescending smile. And I smile a real smile, a warm one, that reaches my eyes. The story I've just told you isn't really about revenge. It's about value. It's about what happens when a company forgets what true value is. They think it's in a brand name, or a stock price, or a line on a spreadsheet. But they're wrong. The true value of any company is in its people. It's in their knowledge, their experience, their passion, and their loyalty. It's in the institutional memory and the quiet competence that keeps the whole thing running. They think they can cut it, outsource it, or replace it with a cheaper, younger model. But some things can't be optimized. Some things can't be automated. For anyone out there who has ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or erased by a boss who values a fancy degree more than decades of experience, my story is for you. For anyone who has been told they are redundant, too old, or not a cultural fit for some new soulless corporate vision, know this: your knowledge is your power, your experience is your leverage, and your integrity is your shield. They can take your job, but they can't take who you are. And in the end, competence is a funny thing. It's quiet, it's unassuming, and you often don't realize how much of it you had until it's gone. And by then, it's always too late.
Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like this video, leave a comment and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories about getting what you deserve. Until next time, remember to know your worth. Because if you don't, you can be sure someone else will try to set the price for you, and it'll always be a bargain for them.